At her baby shower, my daughter told me, "You'll embarrass me. Please leave early." So I did, and took the nursery fund I had saved since she was 14. She cried when the truth came out. I arrived early in the afternoon, carrying a small vintage music box I had bought at an antique shop, hoping to leave something enduring for my granddaughter, the one my daughter had never introduced me to, the one she had been so careful to keep hidden. The sun shone through the bay windows, illuminating floral arrangements in blush and cream, and I could hear laughter and champagne popping downstairs even before I rounded the last corner. My heart ached to just stand in that room, that perfect, curated room filled with people who pretended I did not exist. They had positioned me in a corner, wrapped in a shawl that mismatched their neutral palette, and as soon as I entered, the stylist, someone I did not recognize, sighed and asked me to step back where I belonged. I froze in place, realizing that even the color palette was curated to keep me invisible, as though I were a wardrobe sample, not a woman. I lowered my gaze and stood by the wall, the hush of my own breath louder than the party chatter. My daughter greeted me with a tight smile, her phone in hand, dressed perfectly in beige, as though I were an accessory she could remove when inconvenient. Without looking up from her screen, she said, "Mom, just for today, please act normal, or I will crop you out completely." Her voice had no warmth, not even a tremor for my feelings. A buzz of laughter rippled through the guests, polite but sharp like the snap of a twig breaking. I thought I might dissolve into silence, but I stood still, clutching the music box. The host, my former friend, introduced me in passing as our guest of honor, though I was clearly moved into the background immediately after. A photographer snapped a family portrait with me on the edge, chair half empty, the frame tight to eliminate my presence. The photographer said, "Perfect, that is exactly the shot we want." A breath of relief, when I thought I might slip back into the shadows. Then a guest turned and whispered to another while eyeing me, "Who is that old lady in the corner?" The woman's eyebrows lifted. My daughter turned, lips curling into a faint, humorless smile as she replied, "She is a helper, she is not family." The words hung in the air, heavier than any insult I had carried in decades. My knees felt weak. I remember the harsh glare of the chandelier, how the glare lit the angled lines between us, how the music stopped for a moment, and I saw the cogs in the event's perfection shift around me to exclude me entirely. I stepped away, so slowly that no one noticed, until I was halfway out, and then they did not bother to stop me. It was as though I were a wet leaf drifting out of a storm, unnoticed, unremarked, entitled to nothing. No one followed, no one asked if I was still welcome. When I reached the foyer, my shoulder wet with silent tears, I turned back once, toward the door of the party, toward the laughter, the lighting, the curated perfection. It felt like being inside someone else's dream I no longer fit into. I felt as though I had already voted myself out of this life, and each step toward the door was a funeral for the past. At the gift table, I placed the ribbon-wrapped music box and a small, plain envelope that read, "For the baby, from the embarrassment you grew up with." I did not expect her to open it, I just wanted her to hold it. I left through the front door and walked away, with my purse slung over my shoulder and a single tear tracing down like a confession. When the door closed behind me, I heard a slight gasp. A fork hit a plate, but no footsteps followed. My daughter was 17 when she told me she was pregnant. She stood in the kitchen with trembling hands, mascara streaked down her cheeks, whispering over and over again, "I cannot keep it. I'll lose everything." She had dreams of college, of moving to New York City, of becoming someone more than just another girl who got stuck. I listened. I always listened. But there was something in me, something ancient and maternal, that ached to preserve the life she carried. I told her she had options, not just the ones her classmates whispered about, or the ones that seemed easy. She cried in my arms that night, and I held her the way I had when she was 5 and afraid of thunderstorms. For a moment, I thought we had found our way through it. But the next morning, she packed a bag and left without telling me. A friend called to say she had gone to a clinic in another state. I did not panic. I prayed. I waited. And when she returned, pale and quiet, I said only this, "Whatever you did, You are still mine." 2 weeks later, I found the ultrasound photo crumpled in the trash, with the date marked on the corner. It was not hers. She had never gone through with the procedure. She begged me not to tell anyone. "I will go insane if they find out," she whispered, face white with dread. I knew the boy had disappeared. I knew the shame she feared more than anything was not about the child, but about losing the clean future she'd designed for herself. I made the arrangements. I contacted a former student of mine she and her husband had tried for years to adopt. I said I knew of a baby who needed safety, discretion, and love. When the time came, I took my daughter to a quiet birthing center far from our town. I was there for the entire labor. She did not look at the baby. She asked for the lights to be turned off. She wanted it to feel like a bad dream. When we returned home, no one knew. She told her friends she had gone to Europe for a summer pre-college program. She posted pictures of the Eiffel Tower from Pinterest. She smiled wider than she ever had before. And I buried that year inside me like a second heartbeat. Years passed. She thrived. She was accepted into NYU. She studied marketing. She built a persona of strength, independence, and resilience. I was proud, even when she stopped returning my calls. I made excuses for her busyness, for her distracted voice on the holidays. When she unfollowed me on social media, I thought it must have been a mistake. Then one day, a friend showed me an article. "She's incredible," the woman said. I had no idea she came from so little. I stared at the headline, "From foster care to fortune, how one woman built an empire with no family and no help." The words struck harder than any slap. No family, no help. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her quotes. I grew up in the system. I never really had a mother, but maybe that gave me the freedom to become the woman I am. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. I waited for her to call me, to explain, to say it had been taken out of context. But the silence stretched for months. A silence so loud it became a wall I could not climb. I left voicemails, I wrote emails, I sent birthday cards to addresses that were never acknowledged. And still I stayed quiet. Because maybe she needed the lie more than I needed the truth. But there is something cruel in watching your child rewrite you out of their story. Something devastating about seeing photos of your daughter on the cover of a magazine holding a trophy with the caption, "I had no one, so I became someone." I was not no one. I was the woman who paid for her violin lessons, who worked night shifts as a librarian, who pressed cold cloths against her forehead when she had mono. I was the woman who saved her daughter's future at the cost of her own. And now, I was a ghost she had trained herself to forget. I started to notice a pattern. Every time she needed to appeal to investors or grow her audience, she leaned further into the narrative. I never had a real mother figure. I was raised in the shadows. I fought my way out of darkness. And with each phrase, she pulled the soil tighter over my grave. That baby she gave away? I received letters every Christmas from the adoptive mother. Polite, warm notes about milestones, first steps, first words, favorite books. I kept them in a wooden box by my bedside. I never responded. That was our agreement. But I knew. I always knew where my granddaughter was, who she was becoming, and maybe that is what gave me strength to endure the rest. When people looked at me with pity, I said nothing. When her fans left cruel messages on my old blog, calling me a faker, a liar, and an opportunist, I deleted them quietly. I did not defend myself, because I had already defended her. But one day, someday, I knew the story would surface, and when it did, I wanted to be ready. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth, because the truth, no matter how long it sleeps, eventually wakes up. When I was younger, I used to believe that heartbreak came all at once, like the crash of a window or the breaking of a dish, something loud, something sudden. But I have learned, in these final chapters of life, that the most painful breaks come not in moments of fury, but in tiny, calculated absences. The first time I noticed something had shifted, I was scrolling through my daughter's Instagram page, trying to find a photo of us together. Just one. A memory, even if curated, that told the world I existed. But there were none. She had deleted every picture that even hinted at my presence. Christmas mornings, high school graduations, Mother's Day brunches, all gone. In their place were polished images of her standing alone, arms crossed confidently in front of minimalist backdrops, with captions like, "Built myself from nothing," and "No parents, no problem." At first, I told myself it was a branding thing, that she was streamlining her feed to match some aesthetic, that everyone was doing that now. But then I saw it. The only family photo left was of her and her father, taken when she was sick. A man who had not paid a cent of child support, a man who vanished before her first school recital. He was framed like a martyr, a lost hero, and I was airbrushed out of existence. One night she went live on a stream that popped up in my email. Q&A with the founder, it said. I clicked, heart pounding. Her face lit the screen, beautiful and poised, her voice cool and composed. A fan asked about her childhood, and she smiled like it was a well-rehearsed line. "I never really had a mother figure," she said. "I was raised mostly by institutions, foster families, books mostly. I mothered myself." My mouth went dry. I paused the screen, rewound it, played it again. Not a slip, not a metaphor, a clear, cruel erasure. The comments flooded in. "You're so strong, a real self-made woman. This is why you're successful. No dead weight holding you back." And I sat there with my teacup trembling in my hand, wondering how long I had been dead to her. When I went to the grocery store the next day, an old friend stopped me by the frozen peas. She looked uncomfortable, twisting her wedding band with her thumb. "I saw something," she said. "Online. About your daughter." She said she grew up without a mother? I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. I could not bring myself to say what I needed to say, that I had raised her alone, that I had ironed her uniforms and braided her hair and sold jewelry at flea markets to pay for her violin lessons, that I had held her while she sobbed over her first heartbreak, and that I had nearly broken my own back covering for her shame. Instead, I smiled and said, "There must be a misunderstanding." But misunderstandings have a way of spreading like mold. Soon my phone calls went unanswered. Neighbors who used to wave began looking the other way. One woman, who had once invited me to every garden party, now told others that I was obsessed with my daughter's fame. The church book club I had attended for 12 years quietly removed me from the group message. I tried to call my daughter one evening, just to ask her why. I did not demand, I did not cry, I simply asked, "Sweetheart, is there something I've done?" Her answer was silence at first, then a heavy sigh. "Mom," she said, "you need to stop stalking me online. You're embarrassing." That was the word she kept using, embarrassing. Not abusive, not cruel, not neglectful, embarrassing. I wanted to scream, to ask, what did I do that was so shameful? Was it the apron I wore when I worked nights at the diner? The way I wrapped her leftovers in foil shaped like swans? Was it that I was not glamorous enough for her brand, not tragic enough for her backstory? But I said nothing. Instead, I opened an old box under my bed, letters she wrote me from college, drawings she made in second grade that read, "My mommy is my best friend." I touched the corner of a photograph of us at the zoo, her head resting against my shoulder. I remembered the way she used to curl into me on the couch, whispering secrets she told no one else. I sat with those memories until the sun set, and then I quietly put them away, because I knew that in her new world, those memories had no place. She did not just erase me from her narrative, she rewrote me into something shameful, and in doing so, she did not just damage my reputation, she shattered the core of who I had been, for her entire life. There is a loneliness deeper than solitude. It is the loneliness of being unwelcome in the story you helped create. But even in that silence, even in the cold of being cast aside, I did not fight back, not yet. I had something she did not know about. I had time, and I had the truth. There is a moment in every mother's life when love becomes survival. Mine came quietly, without fury or ceremony. I did not scream, I did not throw plates. I simply stood at the edge of my daughter's story and realized if she could erase me, then I could also choose who remembered me. The day after she told me I was embarrassing, I took out the small silver key I had worn around my neck for 40 years. It was thin and warm from years of skin contact, and I had long forgotten how heavy the air felt whenever I turned that lock. The safe was inside a narrow closet behind old linens and a broken sewing machine. It smelled of cedar and the past. Inside was everything she had forgotten I once owned. The deed to the apartment I still technically held in my name. The savings account information I had quietly built from decades of unspent birthday money and retirement deposits. The stock certificates in a paper envelope she once told me to throw away because paper doesn't mean anything now. I counted it all, $60,000 in liquid value, and more in assets I had never touched because they were never meant for me. They were meant for her. Or at least, the version of her I had believed in. And tucked beneath them all was a blue envelope with her name on it. In my handwriting. For the baby, it said. The one you'll have when you're ready. I had started it when she turned 14, after she told me she wanted to be a mother someday. Every year I added a little more. Birthday money I never gave. Bonds from her grandparents. Even the bracelet I wore the day she was born. I stared at that envelope for a long time. Then I put it back into a different folder with a different name. The next morning, I called the one person I knew would answer without judgment. Her name was Erin. She was the daughter of the woman who adopted my granddaughter, the child my daughter had once carried at 17. Erin was in her 30s now, a schoolteacher, gentle and brilliant, with a heart too large for her salary. She used to visit during summers and read aloud to me. She once told me, when I was in the hospital for pneumonia, "If I had a grandma like you, I'd never let you be lonely." I remembered that. And I remembered kindness. When I called, she picked up on the first ring. "Hello, Erin," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "I have something I'd like to give you. It was meant for someone else, but I think you'll know what to do with it." She did not ask questions. She just said, "I'll come by this weekend." Before she arrived, I went to the bank. I revoked my daughter's name from every shared document. I canceled the trust fund transfer scheduled to unlock on the child's birth. I changed beneficiaries. I set up new passwords. I called the lawyer who helped draft my will and told him to update everything immediately. He hesitated. "Your daughter will contest it." "She's been contesting my existence for years," I said. "Let her try." He did not argue. I moved the nursery fund, the one I started saving when my daughter was still in high school, into a new account under Erin's name. I added a note to the transaction, "For a real daughter, one who sees me." I thought I would feel guilt. I did not. When Erin came over that weekend, I handed her a box. Inside were the documents, the blue envelope, and a photo of my daughter at 17, holding her infant daughter for the first and only time. "She may not know where she came from," I said, "but you do. Make sure she never forgets who protected her." Erin hugged me, tight and tearful. "I'll use this for her college. Or therapy, maybe both." We laughed, but it broke something open inside me. Not grief, not even anger, just release. On the morning of the baby shower, the same one where my daughter pushed me out of the frame and into the shadows, the transfer was complete. By the time the first mimosa was poured, every dollar I had ever saved for her was in someone else's hands. I watched the live stream for 5 minutes, enough to see the glitter balloons, the overpriced decorations, the fake affection. She smiled into the camera and said, "This baby is my legacy." I turned it off before I threw up. Because if legacy meant dishonesty, then I would rather be forgotten. But I knew something she didn't. Legacies are not built on stories we tell the world. They are built on who stands by us when no one is watching. The morning after the baby shower, I woke up expecting silence. That had become our rhythm. Wounds left unacknowledged, phone lines quiet, air thick with unsaid things. But instead my phone buzzed at 6:04 a.m. It was a message from her. No greeting, no apology, just a single line that cut through bone like frostbite. "Please don't show up again. I'm trying to build a life without shame." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because I had not expected her to spell it out so plainly. Shame. That was what I had become to her. Not a mother, not a sacrifice, not a foundation she once stood on, just shame in a cardigan. I didn't reply. What was there to say? She had finally said out loud what she'd been showing for years. Around noon that day, I received a call from an old colleague. Margaret, we had taught together once upon a time. She had retired to Arizona and kept up with me only through the occasional postcard or forwarded meme. But today her voice was shaken. "Anne," she said, I wasn't going to get involved, but I think you should hear this. She sent me an audio file. Apparently, someone at the baby shower, someone I didn't know, had been recording on their phone and accidentally captured a conversation between my daughter and one of her friends near the hallway. I sat down in the kitchen, turned the volume up and pressed play. Her voice was unmistakable, cool, professional, like always, but this time, laced with something darker. She's not even a real person to me anymore, she was saying. She's just a weight I've carried. There was a laugh, soft, uncomfortable. Then, I wish that woman would just die quietly and let me live my truth. The clip ended with the clink of champagne glasses. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat there in the same kitchen where I had once peeled apples for her school lunches, where I had bandaged her scraped knees and taught her to say please and thank you, where I had once read college brochures aloud to her and saved every penny to help her leave. And now I was a ghost she wished would vanish without sound. I replayed the clip once, then again. Not out of disbelief, but because I wanted to memorize it. Then I saved it. Not because I needed revenge, but because truth, when silenced too long, becomes evidence. That evening, I made myself a small bowl of soup and watched the light fade outside the window. I thought of all the versions of her I had known. The little girl who once held my hand too tightly in crowds. The teenager who wept over a baby she wasn't ready for. The woman who built an empire by erasing every trace of where she came from. And I thought of myself, not as the mother she disowned, but as the woman she underestimated. That was her mistake, because I had given her life. But I did not owe her my silence. I had not touched the piano in years. My fingers were slower now, the joints stiffer. The strength in my hands fading like breath on glass. But that afternoon, I opened the lid, wiped the dust from the keys and played a soft version of Edelweiss, the lullaby I used to hum to her through bedroom doors she now pretended never existed. I set my phone against a stack of old books. No filters, no lighting tricks, just a grandmother in a cardigan, speaking softly over a melody the internet would not expect. When I finished playing, I looked into the lens and said only this. She wasn't alone. She was never alone. I was there, every minute. She just rewrote the story. My voice did not shake. I reached for the manila folder I had placed beside the piano bench. I held up a photo, a 17-year-old girl with fear in her eyes and a barely visible bump beneath her sweatshirt. My daughter. She got pregnant at 17, I continued. I helped her give birth. I helped her place that baby in the arms of a family who had prayed for her. I did not shame her. I protected her. I kept her secret for 17 years. I held up the adoption document. She says she had no mother, but she had me. She just stopped needing me the moment I stopped being useful to her narrative. I did not name her. I did not curse. I just told the truth. The video was 3 minutes and 27 seconds long. I uploaded it to a platform I barely understood, typed one sentence in the caption, "Truth doesn't need a filter," and pressed post. I closed the laptop and went to make tea. By evening, my phone began to buzz. First it was Aaron, "You're going viral, are you okay?" Then my lawyer, "You might want to stay offline for the next 48 hours. This exploded, and finally, a name I did not expect. Margaret, from church. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. We all believed her. We didn't know. The video had crossed 500,000 views before midnight. By dawn, it passed 2 million. Someone had spliced my piano into a TikTok trend. Another user created a side-by-side clip of my daughter's I Never Had a Mother interview and my adoption documents. People began digging. Old-school records, photos, blog posts, obituaries that named me explicitly as her mother. Then came the headlines. Fake orphan, influencer's mother speaks up. Truth bomb, quiet grandma destroys online, legacy of self-made CEO. The backlash was swift. Hashtags flipped. Motherless to millions turned into erased my mother. Influencer watchdog accounts began dissecting her brand, her quotes, her ghost-written memoir. Parents wrote threads about the dangers of manufacturing trauma for profit. But the loudest blow came 2 days later. The luxury baby brand that had sponsored her entire launch campaign pulled out. Their statement was short. "We support honesty. We cannot, in good conscience, continue to partner with a public figure whose personal narrative appears to have been falsified at the expense of a family member. I watched the video where she tried to apologize. Her makeup was perfect, but her hands shook. She said, "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I needed a story that made sense of the pain." I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The world had finally heard mine, and in that moment, I realized something simple. Silence may be survival, but truth is salvation. There are many kinds of justice in this world. Some are loud, courtrooms, sirens, broken doors. And some are slow, quiet, the kind that arrives in inboxes and headlines, the kind that looks like dignity, returned inch by inch. I didn't watch her downfall live. I didn't need to. The notifications came to me like wind chimes in a storm, soft but relentless. First came the corporate collapse. A major brand, a diaper company whose slogan was ironically built on trust, announced it was severing all ties with her. "We regret the oversight," they wrote. "Integrity must always come before image." Others followed. Sponsorships vanished in less than 72 hours. Scheduled appearances were pulled. Podcast invitations were rescinded. Her book, one that painted her as an orphaned phoenix, was quietly delisted from 3 platforms. She stopped trending for inspiration. She started trending for fraud. The court notices came next. Turns out, several of her statements had been used to secure partnerships based on the unique emotional weight of her orphaned entrepreneur persona. Brands invested on that premise. One even filed a claim for breach of contract, alleging she built a false origin story to create commercial appeal. They called it emotional misrepresentation, a new term for an old sin. I did not celebrate. I just watered my plants and added another coat of varnish to the chair on the porch, the same porch where I once rocked her to sleep. But what struck me most, what rooted the moment in something deeper, was not the lawsuits, nor the headlines, nor even the meme accounts that called her the mom eraser. It was the letter. It arrived folded neatly inside a legal envelope, but the handwriting was familiar. My lawyer had delivered it on behalf of a colleague, one I hadn't seen in decades. A family attorney who used to help me draft paperwork when my daughter was applying for scholarships. Inside was a statement he had helped prepare. A formal complaint about patterned emotional neglect and public misrepresentation of a surviving elder, submitted to a review board. It read, in part, "There is clear indication of exploitative behavior and emotional harm inflicted upon a senior family member for the purpose of advancing a falsified narrative. This should be considered in all matters of estate planning, power of attorney, and future claims of care." He added a personal note in his own cursive. "Anne, I remember the sacrifices. So do others. Let her live with what she's made." And that was enough. Still, the final blow came not from a lawyer. It came from her. In a live stream that lasted less than 15 minutes, she appeared barefaced, eyes red, voice shaking. Her usual backdrops were gone. No white walls, no candles, no branding. Just her. "I know I've lost everything," she began, "and maybe that's what I deserve." She paused, swallowed. "I thought I needed to escape the version of myself that grew up needing people. I thought if I rewrote the story, I could control it. That I could own the pain instead of feeling it." She sniffed, looked down. Maybe I did erase her, but it was easier than admitting I was scared. The comment section, once filled with praise, was now a battlefield. Words like manipulative, disgusting, and "you used your mom as a prop you never credited" flashed across the screen. When she finished speaking, she reached to turn off the camera. Her last words were barely a whisper. "I was just so afraid of not being enough." And then the screen went black. Within hours, the platform suspended her account. Terms like deceptive identity use and fraudulent persona were mentioned. Her apology video was taken down for policy violations. It lived only in downloaded fragments, stitched into reaction clips from strangers who had once idolized her. She didn't fight it. There were no countersuits, no denials, only silence. A silence I knew well. But unlike hers, mine had never been built on fear. Mine had been built on memory. And memory, when protected long enough, becomes something stronger than justice. It becomes proof. I didn't move far. Just enough. My new apartment was modest. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, windows that opened out onto a quiet lake where ducks floated like punctuation marks in the water. The air smelled like honeysuckle and early forgiveness. It was enough. No one here asked who I used to be, and no one tried to erase me. The first thing I unpacked was my piano. It had been tuned twice in the past 20 years, but the keys still remembered me. Their touch was gentler now, like they too had been waiting for a second chance. I put up a sign at the library and the pharmacy, "Free piano lessons for seniors and children who feel left behind." That's what I wrote, nothing else. At first, only one person came, a boy with a stutter and a worn-out backpack. He sat beside me on the bench, barely touching the keys. "You don't have to be perfect," I told him, just honest. By the end of the month, there were 5 students. By spring, 10. The oldest was 73, the youngest, 8. Some came to play. Some came just to sit and not be alone. I taught them not just chords, but rhythm, resilience, the art of listening before pressing any key. We did not talk about fame. We did not talk about shame. Only music. One afternoon, after a lesson, I found an envelope on my doorstep. No stamp, just handwriting I recognized immediately, steady, slanted, with a looped G that tugged at memory. It was from Erin. Inside was a photo of her daughter, my granddaughter, 17 now, holding a certificate for a composition she had written for school. The note said, "She doesn't know the whole story yet, but one day she will, and when she does, I want her to hear your music first." I sat for a long time, holding that photo. I had spent years thinking I had been erased, but legacies aren't deleted by silence. They're rewritten by kindness. A few weeks later, the girl in the photo came to visit. She was shy, polite. She called me Ms. Anne, until I told her she could call me anything she liked. She chose Grandma A. She touched the piano like it was sacred. We played a duet. At the end, she turned to me and asked, "Do you think people can change?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I said, "I think people can listen, and sometimes that's the first note." That summer, I received one final letter from my daughter. It was 3 sentences long. "I saw the video. I know what I did. I'm sorry I took your silence as absence." I folded it without reply. Forgiveness is a room you build slowly, and some doors take a long time to open. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I had a classroom to prepare, sheet music to print, a bench to share. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the lake, I sat at the piano with the youngest of my students, a little girl with a quiet smile and hands that trembled with firsts. We played Edelweiss together. Her fingers slipped once, twice. I smiled. "Again," I said. She nodded. We played it again, and again. Outside, the world turned. Inside, the music held us both. I don't need the spotlight. I don't need revenge. I have something louder than outrage and softer than shame. I have sound. I have students. And I have a story. They tried to crop me out of their picture, so I painted my own. And in the final frame, it is not their faces you see. It's a grandmother teaching a child to find her voice through the keys. The screen fades, but the music doesn't stop, because silence isn't weakness. It's what happens when a mother learns to let her piano speak for her. I had learned long ago that endings do not always arrive with fanfare. Some simply settle into the soft hum of everyday life, in places you least expect them. For me, the end did not come in headlines or courtrooms, but in the quiet morning light slipping across my new kitchen floor. I have not gone back to the house we once shared, not because I cannot, but because I should not. As long as it still belonged to the person who tried to erase me, it could never be home again. So I chose a different beginning, a small apartment by the lake, where the ducks drifted like punctuation on the water and the breeze carried lilies instead of reminders. The move was simple. A few pieces of furniture, boxes labeled books, piano, letters. Everything I did not need for my story to be heard again. My back ached for a few days, and I slept like the living finally should, without fear, without design. I pulled the piano into its corner and let my fingers remember their song. At first, the notes crackled, catching on rust and disuse. But the keys remembered me. and soon they sang again. The melody rose, soft and porous, as though the room itself had been waiting for it. One afternoon I found a red marker in my bag and 3 sheets of notepaper. I wrote, "Free piano lessons for those who feel forgotten and for those who need to remember, Anne A." I taped it to the supermarket door and the library entrance. I left extras at the community board, in the bakery, and then I waited. At first 1 person came, a teenage boy with near-empty batteries in his tablet and eyes that flickered like candlelight. He fumbled through a duet, barely audible, but he played. And then a second arrived, a woman nearly 80, knees weak with loss. She smiled when I said, "You are here," and though she said nothing, I knew I had told her something. She belonged here. By spring there were 5 students, each of them carried their own burdens. A widow whose husband had stopped talking before he died. A young girl orphaned at 12, studying piano 1 reluctant note at a time. A former factory worker whose fingers trembled with age but still pressed down on chords of memory. A mother learning respite, and a child whose home was too noisy and who came to me to find a moment of silence. We did not talk about the world. We only talked about music. How your heart retires when your hands forget. How 1 moment of sound, an honest, unfiltered chord, can reset how you feel about living. One day, Aaron's daughter appeared at my lesson. She was 17 now, carrying certificates for composition wins. I gave her chocolate chip cookies, then reluctantly let her sit at my piano. She played, not badly, but softly, as though she expected to break something if she pressed too hard. I watched her hold the notes, and then I said, "Don't ask questions, just play." She played for 15 minutes. It was enough. Later, Aaron wrote to me, "She doesn't know yet, but she will, and your music will be the first truth she learns about where she comes from." I tucked the message into my pocket like a lifeline. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the ducks glided across golden water, I received a letter from my daughter. No apology, just, "Thank you for telling the truth I could not say." I folded it carefully, without opening it further. I thought of the silence we shared and how different it was from what I had known. This was not avoidance. It was a recognition after years of being unrecognizable. I put the letter in a drawer beside my bed, alongside the newspaper clipping that had shattered her public persona. I did not want to reread it. The echoes were loud enough. I stared out the window at my students. The boy whose hands no longer shook. The widow humming softly when she learned Clair de Lune. The mother who brought her torn children for lessons. I listened not to their applause, but to the pause between their breaths, where healing lingered. I realized something important. Endings rarely happen in one moment. They unfold in the little sureness of a child's finger learning middle C, in the soft return of peace to someone's posture, in the watching of music bloom in others. This was my ending. Quiet, gradual, a reclamation named Melody and Presence. I walked downstairs to check the mail. It contained my publishing contract, or rather, the release of it. My daughter's pressing popularity had at one time been sponsored by my story, An Orphaned Motherless Tale. Now that was gone. The words we had woven to sell hope were unraveled. I took the contract upstairs and sat by the piano. Snow-white keys glowed beneath the lamp. I placed pen to paper, not to correct history, but to continue. The book I would write now would be lessons, not confessionals. A lesson on what it means to be erased, a lesson on what harmony sounds like afterward, and a lesson on how quiet can be louder than fame. Because they tried to crop me out of the frame. But I painted my own canvas, a grandmother teaching children to sing again, and the final image is not of me alone, but of all of us finding our voices. The page turns. The chords still hum, and I am finally home. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of a quiet woman in your life who was stronger than anyone ever knew, then you're not alone. Here on Grandma True Stories, we tell the truths they tried to bury. Stories of silence, sacrifice, and the quiet kind of justice that doesn't need to scream. If you believe that wisdom doesn't fade with age and that revenge has no expiration date, then subscribe, stay, listen, because when a grandmother speaks, the world finally hears. hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and come sit with me next Sunday. This is Grandma True Stories, where silence tells the loudest tales.